Okay, thank you very much. I will try to use the microphone, although it's a bit too tight. Okay, my first presentation is about ID thefts and especially the threats of these ID thefts, placing that in the context of what it's currently running as identification technologies within the European Union. This is the introduction to why the project of EKSISTENZ has a meaning and the work that has to be addressed in the future. So, in order to just start and trying to speak the same language, let's define a couple of terms. So let's define the difference between what we are going to call as primary ID and secondary ID. So the primary ID is something that it has a quite strong legal constraint. It's a trusted identity, it's a recognized identity by other parties and usually issued by a governmental agency which is completely independent. So it has no additional interest except for the safety and the security of their citizens. On the other hand, we have the secondary identities, which are the thousands of identities that we may have during the day, just to log into our social networks or to go for our bank and things like that. So an example of the primary ID would be, for example, a national ID card. In some cases, we can talk about an electronic passport or a passport. In the case of secondary IDs, we can think about our bank cards, our university cards, or whatever other kind of, or even the login, the Facebook login, or things like this. Also, we have to make a difference between what it is called as identity and electronic identity. Although we are in a community that we are quite familiar with the term of electronic identity, but this is the idea of one thing, it's the physical identity, something that I can show physically and they can check my identity physically, and I need a physical somehow contact with the other person, a face-to-face verification, while the electronic identity is the one that allows us to identify through the net or even in a face-to-face identification to allow us to check that that document is valid enough. And if we go through the electronic identities, obviously most of us or some of us would think that electronic identity, let's say it's a cryptographic smart cards with all the certificates there, certificate for authentication, a certificate for electronic signature, but we should be aware that we use many other kind of different identities I have placed in the examples before. So we have things like just a login and a password. In other cases, for example, a login and password and some kind of a token. So for example, these two examples in a case of a bank system. So one is to access your accounts and the other one, for example, is to be able to do wire transfers. Or we can have electronic tokens, that means tokens with a reasonable security embedded and the certificates embedded within the tokens. Okay, and what do we have in Europe? So we have nearly everything. So if we just go very fast about what we have countries that have issued a primary identity, which is an electronic identity with all kind of functionalities or most of the needed functionalities. We have countries that has an electronic identity which are little used and may have a limited functionality. In our case, for example, within the context of EKSISTENZ, we have found out that Italy and the Netherlands are two of those cases. We do have countries that do not have an electronic identity as a primary identity. They do have still a physical paper-based or plastic-based identity card, but they do have the concept of a national identity, although it might not be compulsory. In the case of France, for example, it is optional, although most of the people have it. And then we also have the cases of countries which do not issue any kind of national identity card. They, let's say, do not have per se a primary identity, although we can start trying to approach things like the passports and the driving license to this kind of concept. But there is no the conception or even there is a lack of willingness of establishing this kind of national ID concept or national ID infrastructure. If we open up the study to what we can find at the network, so we can see that within the European Union, we have further countries like, for example, Austria, that is in the same case as France. We do have that Denmark has the same case as the UK. We have countries that has also a paper-based national ID card, but which is compulsory, and this is most of the Eastern European countries. And we do have countries that has an electronic ID card. For some of them, the light blue ones is optional. For some others, the dark blue ones are compulsory, as the ones in green that we have already studied. So you can see that the variety is good enough, and that's where the threats starts to appear. Why? Because obviously, if we have countries with no compulsory primary identity, so we may not have the processes to check that identity, and we won't have homogeneity among Europe. So this is the first problem, in fact. But then, if we have countries with a primary ID, but which is not electronic, then our cybersecurity is completely compromised, and it will be based on secondary identities, which in some cases no one knows who is issuing that identity and who is the real person that is behind that secondary identity. So we do have quite a lot of problems. The lack of homogeneity, obviously, it's an open door to those people that wants to attack the system, and therefore the threats starts to appear. Then, if we go for a primary identity and we have the life cycle of a primary identity, that is the typical, I first issue that, then I use it, then I may be losing the card, or I have to renew the card, so then I have a renewal process, and also it may happen to be the end of the life of that identity or the end of the life of the citizen. So we still have also that kind of problem. So if we take a look to that, those processes involved in here, we also see so many different things. So different member states has different processes, and those different processes can differ so much. So for example, for the issuance, about the location, for some countries, it is just a local town hall or the local office from the local administration. For some others are police stations. So the level of, let's say, commitment or security involved in some cases are quite different. If we are talking about the breather documents, so those documents that allow you for issuing an ID, so that's a hell of a variety. That it's from the very, let's say, strict process of going when you are below a certain age, usually, let's say, 14 years old, with your parents and your birth certificate, and your parents that have already been registered in the system, register yourself with those documents, till just getting a proof of address and a photograph signed at the back by some person within the system. So the different variations that we may have, it's enormous. And this is one of the worst problems, because if you can fake the breather document, then it is so easy to fake the identity. And if you fake the identity, then you can do whatever. And also, what's the differences between the data that is registered in each of the member states? In some cases, it's just the personal data, name, surname, date of birth, nothing more. In some others, many more auxiliary data. Could be the address, could be profession, could be even be religious background, although this is not usually the case in Europe, but in some countries it is. It could be so many different things. And in some countries, they want to register the biometrics, the biometric information inside. In some others not. For biometrics, we are talking about the face, we can talk about fingerprints, iris, we can talk about signature. We have all different kind of possibilities within Europe. About the duration of the document, 2, 5, 10 years, 20, for life, depending on the situation, depending on the country. The renewal, in some cases, is completely automatic. In some others, you have to just be present at for example, the police station just to pick it up. In some other cases, you have to re-enroll again into the system. So you guys have to go through the whole process. So then your credentials are expected to be, current and live, let's say. So the easier that you fake the document, the worst of our lives. Which is the minimum personal data that we should store in order to be able to guarantee a certain level of security to our citizens against ID theft? Is there any deduplication system installed? And this is one of the worst problems, because it may happen even that I can just enroll in 2 different countries of the European Union with 2 different identities. If I can fake the documents, I can just do that. And it might not be the case that you have within the country the duplication process, or it might be, but for sure it is not such kind of a process within Europe. So nobody's going to be able to double check if you are also, let's say, for example, a French citizen and a Spanish citizen at the same time, with different names, different identities. Is there any revocation list for those identity cards that have been stolen? How you can maintain accurate the data that is stored in the system. So all that are questions that can be used to play for the attackers against us. About services, within Europe we have several different kind of services that can be used, that can use identity checking. The nicest one that I like is the voting system. So we have systems that where in order to go and voting for the general elections, for example, you just have to present your national ID card and that is being checked. But in some other cases, it's there that you say, oh, Mr. Smith, I live in High Street, number 12. Ah, yes, you're in the list. That's it. So no identity checking at all. So, and to use a bank card, this is something that for sure most of us have experienced. You have countries that they ask you for an additional proof of identity. You have other countries that they do not check anything at all. Yeah, and for example, one of these cases is the United States, for example. So again, if the citizens are not homogeneous, then again, the identity check is not going to be fully compliant. And the worst thing is a SOP attendant, for example, being able to assess whether the document that I'm providing is an authenticated one or is a faked one. Here is an example of the different documents of 7 of the of our countries within Europe, and as you can see, they differ quite a lot. So and all of them has a different security mechanisms embedded, but nobody knows how to check that. So you only see that, oh, it seems professional, so that's good. So attackers can make also professional documents themselves. About electronic ID is more or less the same case, but what are you providing? Are you providing authentication mechanisms? Are you providing electronic signature? Are you having those certificates within a cryptographic smart card and all the processes are done within the smart card? Are the certificates being stored in the smart card but then retrieved to the computer or the device? Or are they certificates that are being just installed in the computer? And if they are installed in the computer, then again, all kind of Trojan horses or malware can just get gain of those certificates. Are you going to support different platforms? So we were talking like 3 years ago about just personal computers. Nowadays, everybody's thinking that the people are using smartphones, tablets. So then the contactless interface is quite an important thing. So it's again, all the threats that can come. So what are the challenges in order just to try to wrap up? So we should have the challenge of trying to create a homogeneous concept of what is a national identity is for, and especially which are the benefits for the citizens. We have to try to create interoperable solutions for the use of ID cards. We cannot think that there will be one single solution, one single provider. We have to work on the interoperability of the different solutions. We have to improve the legislation, and for that, EIDAS has come up with furthermore information and furthermore requirements just lately. And then the minimum services. And one important thing, although you have some legal constraints, for sure you will have these slides later on. I want to take furthermore, and about the social constraints, you will see that in Marek's presentation later on. But what it is really important is that whenever you are going to implement a national ID card or a primary ID or even a secondary ID, you also provide the services. And if you provide the services and the identity, then the user will use those services, they would get familiar with using these services and won't start creating cases like, for example, having your national ID card with certificates with your PIN code, but you only use that PIN code once a year, and as you only use it once a year, so you forget, or you just write it down within your national ID card, and obviously you destroyed all the security. An excellent example of how these things can be deployed can be seen, for example, in Estonia, where so many services are available, so many different things can be done, and the population are using it up to a level of 90% of the population using as a, let's say, daily, weekly, monthly basis, the national ID card for all kind of purposes. And so that's it from my side. We will leave questions for later on.